That was a factual statement that Pierre Poilievre made. Shouldn't be criticized for making it because the evidence is clear. They covered up both situations.
Following our recent video on the media's reaction to the Pierre Poilievre viral comments about Canada's two-tier justice system and the mistrust that Canadians have in the RCMP, we thought it would be a good idea to turn to an organization that knows more about the SNC Lavalin and ethics scandals than pretty much anyone, including the RCMP, as it turns out. Today, we're joined by Duff Conacher, co-founder of Democracy Watch, a non-partisan organization that has spent over 30 years fighting for government accountability and the rule of law. Today, we're going to be discussing their ongoing effort to launch a private prosecution against Justin Trudeau over the SNC Lavalin scandal, and what this case reveals about fairness and integrity in Canada's justice system. Mr. Conacher, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's just start with the press release that you guys dropped yesterday. This was in regard to a push to launch a private prosecution against Justin Trudeau. What prompted Democracy Watch to initiate the original challenge on this in the first place?
Well, Democracy Watch filed an access to information request back in actually 2021 and then updated it in 2022, trying to get the internal investigation records of the RCMP into the Justin Trudeau SNC Lavalin scandal, which the public has a right to see after an investigation is completed. The RCMP didn't disclose all of the records until the spring of 2024, so we had to wait 2.5 years. And what the records show is that they did a negligently weak, incomplete investigation, used an incorrect legal standard for letting Trudeau off, and as a result, we decided to, taking these 3,600 pages of internal RCMP records and the other evidence on the record, to file an application for approval from an Ontario court to pursue a private prosecution of Trudeau, because we think the RCMP did cover things up, tried to anyway, but we dug all the information out, and that they were just trying to let it all drop quietly and hope everyone would go away.
Now, when you say they applied an improper legal standard, is this in relation to kind of exceeding the scope of their mandate, and they're trying to decide whether or not Justin Trudeau is guilty prior to an investigation or prosecution actually taking place? Because this is what the Conservatives and Larry Brock were hitting the commissioner and his staff sergeant with in committee back in February of 2024.
What happens is the RCMP does have an internal lawyer hired in a position that he's actually out in Vancouver, and he advises them on it's the proper title is financial crimes, but also these kind of anti-corruption situations. We didn't get any of his opinions. Those were withheld as under the solicitor-client privilege exemption in our federal open government law, which is called the Access to Information Act. But we did get all the evidence, the investigations, the interviews that they did with everyone. And what came out of that was they initially used the correct legal standard for obstruction of justice, which is all you have to do is show that someone willfully tried to stop the course of a judicial process, like a prosecution. But halfway through, after they gathered lots of evidence that Justin Trudeau had done exactly that, and there's lots of evidence on the record that he had willfully tried to stop a prosecution, they then switch. And there's a document in the records in these 3,600 pages where they suddenly say, oh, the standard we have to prove is that Justin Trudeau had a corrupt intent, a criminal intent, when trying to stop this prosecution. And that is not the standard. The Supreme Court of Canada issued a ruling that is binding on all law enforcement officials across Canada in 2007 that said to prove obstruction of justice, you only have to prove that someone willfully tried to obstruct justice. You don't have to prove that they wrongfully or with a corrupt intent tried to do it. And the RCMP switched to using that incorrect intent and then used that to let Trudeau off because they said he wasn't corruptly trying to stop this. He was just trying to stop it. And so that's the key thing that we were going to place before the court is, look, we have all the clear evidence of obstruction, including in our application was an opinion by a retired Superior Court justice saying that the evidence meets the standard of obstruction of justice, and as well as all the evidence we dug out of the RCMP. And we wanted to place that before a court. So it was about that incorrect legal standard, not the other issue that you've raised, where the RCMP is not supposed to decide whether a prosecution could definitely succeed. They're just supposed to decide, is there enough there to lay a charge? And then the court will hear the evidence and the court will make the decision as to whether the line was actually crossed. They didn't really do that. They just used the incorrect legal standard and as a result let Trudeau off for a completely unjustifiable, invalid reason. And that's a cover-up.
Well, and just to give everyone watching some context, so Duff, that would be like if I steal a car and I get arrested. Well, I don't get arrested. They interview everybody around me because the RCMP didn't actually interview the person of interest, Justin Trudeau. So they interview everybody around me and they interview the person who actually the car belongs to. And then the police actually determine or decide that I didn't steal the car with criminal intent. I stole it accidentally. And therefore I don't need to be charged because I didn't steal it with criminal intent. That's basically what we're talking about here, right?
Yes. Some offenses in the criminal code, you do have to show a corrupt intent. But for others, like obstruction of justice, you just have to show intent and that the person actually obviously did the actions. And that evidence was there for the RCMP. And they switched to using the wrong standard. And that's why we decided to pursue a private prosecution. So when Pierre Poilievre said in his interview with you that he's concerned about the RCMP covering up for Trudeau, yes, that is an accurate statement, both in the SNC-Lavalin situation and the Aga Khan situation. And just the Aga Khan situation is even more clear. Trudeau accepted a gift from the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan had dealings with the government. That's a violation of the criminal code unless your boss in government gives you written approval to accept that benefit or gift. It's crazy that loophole is in there in the criminal code, that your boss can approve you essentially taking
breaking the law. Yeah.
But Trudeau has no boss in the government, so he would have had to give written approval to himself. He was asked in question period more than once, did you give yourself written approval? He said no.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is no statute of limitations on fraud charges, and the Prime Minister is not above the law.
Right.
The criminal code is clear. The only way the Prime Minister is not guilty of fraud is if the Prime Minister gave himself consent to break the law. That is in the criminal code. This is a clear and a straightforward question. I would like a yes or a no answer. Did the Prime Minister give himself permission to get away with committing a criminal fraud offence?
No, Mr. Speaker.
The RCMP didn't even interview him. They had the evidence from question period that he hadn't given himself written approval. He took the gift from someone who had dealings with the government, clear violation of the criminal code. And they also tried to bury that investigation. With both these investigations, the RCMP, first of all, denied they were investigating. They said, we're just reviewing it. And then they just said nothing more and just tried to, through being silent, hope that everyone would just go on to the new news and forget this as old news. And that's why we dug out both in the SNC-Lavalin and the Aga Khan the records through access to information to show just how negligently bad a cover-up it was in both situations. So that was a factual statement that Pierre Poilievre made. Shouldn't be criticized for making it because the evidence is clear. They covered up both situations.
Now, when it comes to Justin Trudeau answering that question in question period, some Canadians may ask the question, well, doesn't parliamentary privilege, protect him from that? And the answer to that is no, parliamentary privilege will not protect you from indicting yourself into criminal activity. It can protect you from civil liability and civil litigation like defamation and things like that, but it will not protect you. Parliamentary privilege will not protect you against any involvement in criminal liability, which is why the Conservatives and others such as yourself were calling the RCMP to use that to answer their last question in their decision tree, which was brought up on whether or not to charge him.
Yeah,
now,
they didn't even need to do that, though. They could have just said to him, unless you
asked him.
Yeah, ask him. You would think they would interview the person alleged to have done wrong, and ask him, do you have the written approval to yourself to accept this gift? Because if not, then we have all the evidence to charge you. And
if not, then please place out your wrist, Mr. Trudeau.
Yeah, your alibi is this written approval. Otherwise, you have no alibi. You have nothing to escape this criminal charge. Instead, they didn't even interview him. That's a cover-up. And they just delayed, like they didn't say anything, right? They made the media's paying attention. Okay, if the media never asks us about this, we will never say anything about it. That's not what should happen in these situations. And in British Columbia, generally, a special prosecutor will be appointed, first of all, who's independent, not internal to the RCMP, behind closed doors with the commissioner. And they will issue a full public explanation if they decide not to charge anyone. That explains why not. And what did the RCMP do in both these cases? Initially said we're reviewing them and then never said anything and just hoped everyone would go away. It's very clear that they hoped everyone would go away and they would never say anything about it again. That's a cover-up in both situations.
And this prompts the question, going back to the SNC Lavalin affair, but I imagine the question may also be able to be asked about the Aga Khan affair. But so you're saying that in these documents you were reviewing, in this access to information request, the RCMP seemed to be operating above board up to a certain point. And then they all of a sudden changed the legal standard in which they were applying this to. Why do you think they did that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. What Michael Duhem, the RCMP commissioner, said yesterday when asked was he mischaracterized what Pierre Poilievre had alleged, because Pierre Poilievre alleged only a cover-up. And Michael Duhem, the RCMP commissioner, said, there was no interference. I do not follow what any political person says. But that's not what Pierre Poilievre said. He said there was a cover-up. He didn't say that there was political interference in these investigations. What we do know is, one, the RCMP commissioner, and most everyone do not know this, and it's really stunning, and it's the same for provincial police forces across the country and municipal police forces. The RCMP commissioner, the deputy commissioner, the head of every division in the RCMP, they are all chosen by the ruling party cabinet, and they serve at their pleasure. They can be fired at any time for any reason. They have no job security, and they have no independence as a result. And so when they're investigating politicians, the RCMP commissioner, deputy commissioners, they're the ones who make the final decision. The investigating officer sent their report to headquarters in March of 2021 in the SNC Lavalin situation, and headquarters sat on it till January 2023. And they're the ones who serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister, who were deciding whether the Prime Minister should be charged. That's just a layer cake of conflicts of interest. It is not an independent police force when it comes to anti-corruption, anti-foreign interference, any other kind of situation involving politicians or government officials. Because, especially with the federal cabinet, they're watching over and making decisions about people who decide whether they have a job the next day. That's just not an independent police force. And so you don't need interference in that situation. You have a systemic conflict of interest where the RCMP, the top brass of the RCMP, serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister that they're watching over, And when you have a case where the Prime Minister is alleged to have violated the criminal code, they should not be investigating the Prime Minister. That's what should have happened. A special prosecutor should have been appointed with the approval of all federal party leaders, and a provincial or city police force, which is not under the control of the Trudeau cabinet, should have been the one that investigated. And that outside lawyer and that police force would then have made the decision. Instead, we had a layer cake of conflicts of interest and a secret behind closed doors decision to cover up the situation.
Do you think there's more evidence, or maybe the question should be framed this way? Based on what you've seen in the investigation that Democracy Watch has undertaken, is there anything really concerning that you have found, or Democracy Watch that has found, that the public may not be aware of at this point?
No, I don't think so. Maybe one point, but I'll just mention one other factor that shows just how weak the RCMP investigation was, which a lot of people will know, but some won't because it hasn't really been highlighted by the media. And that is, the Trudeau cabinet said, no, we're not going to give you internal emails, other records of what happened in this whole situation with the Prime Minister Trudeau himself and directing others to try and stop this prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. And the RCMP could have gone to court and challenged that, and probably would have got some of the emails out because, the Trudeau cabinet issued a blanket, said all these records are confidential. And I don't think the court would have said, no, we have to see this. This is key evidence. And at least some of it would have come out. They didn't even try. They just rolled over and accepted that. The other thing that a lot of people probably don't know is, so there was a change in commissioner in the midst of this process. Brenda Lookey ended her term. She was chosen by Trudeau. He then made Michael Duhem into interim RCMP commissioner. And that was in March of 2023. And then he was not made full commissioner by Trudeau until April of 2024, after Michael Duhem had appeared before the House Committee and made it very clear that he would not reopen the SNC-Lavalin investigation. So not only was he handpicked by Trudeau, Michael Duhem, as interim commissioner at this crucial period, but then he's sitting there as interim, even less job security than commissioner, still serving as at the pleasure of Trudeau. And when he finally comes out and says before a House Committee in February 2024, we're not going to reopen this, then Trudeau confirms him as commissioner in April 2024. Again, was there political interference that was direct, where Trudeau was saying, I'll make you commissioner if you do not pursue this? I have no evidence of that. But the chronology and the structure of the RCMP, chosen by and serving at the pleasure of the Prime Minister while investigating and making decisions about whether to charge the Prime Minister with a crime, that smells badly. And that system should change. We need an independent, effective police force like Quebec's had for 15 years since they had a big scandal like this, that is focused on anti-corruption. And the fact that we don't have it in any province or at the federal level except Quebec is a serious problem, because these kind of cases send a message to the people at the top. Don't worry, the police force is there to protect you, not to uphold the law. And you don't have to worry. You don't have to give us political interference. We know you gave us the job and we serve at your pleasure. And therefore, we're going to please you, as opposed to upholding the law in the public interest.
Do you think that let's operate under the assumption that Pierre Poilievre is correct and what you're saying is correct, and that the RCMP did cover all of this up, and you're saying that there's evidence of that. Do you think it's a matter of they were too timid, too afraid to be the first people in history to charge a sitting prime minister? Or do you think it was, no, we're just afraid for our jobs? Or do you think it was a combination of both?
I've been doing this work for 32 years and looked at scandals previous to that. The great Canadian way is, if you resign your public office or walk away, then that's it. they figure you've lost your job, you've lost your political power, so we're not going to go after you for actual violations of the law. And secondly, and what happens usually first is if someone in your office will resign and take the fall for you, then that's it. That's fine. Someone's lost their job. That's their version of accountability. And we'll just let the rest of the people walk away. And I think they were also probably thinking, well, Trudeau was found guilty in the Aga Khan situation by the ethics commissioner of violating the conflict of interest law. Trudeau was found guilty by the ethics commissioner in the SNC-Lavalin situation of violating the federal ethics law. That's enough. We have evidence of a crime, but, he's already been found guilty of violating the key federal ethics law twice. And let's just let him walk away into the sunset. That's the great Canadian way, if you look back through history. And that's why they roll over, in addition to the fact that they're chosen by and serving at the pleasure, right? Someone gives you a job and you're serving at their pleasure. You're in a conflict of interest. And that was the big fault by the RCMP. They shouldn't have been investigating this. In the Green Belt scandal in Ontario involving the Ford government, the OPP commissioner said there's a perceived conflict of interest because I was appointed by Doug Ford. And so we can't investigate, and they referred it to the RCMP. RCMP should have done the same thing in the SNC-Lavalin situation and said, I was chosen, appointed by Trudeau. The case is about Trudeau. We got to refer it to another police force.
So that at least shows some integrity in the commissioner of the OPP, because he recognized that right away and came right out and stated it. And now,
unfortunately, he referred it to the RCMP, though.
Well,
now we're here 2 years later with that Greenbelt scandal, and the RCMP, it just came out a couple of weeks ago. The RCMP has not even interviewed most of the key players. 2 years, and they still haven't interviewed most of the key players. It seems like they're trying to do the same thing in the Greenbelt as they did in the SNC-Lavalin, which is that, yeah, they have independence from the Ontario government, but they're just never going to charge the top politicians or government officials for anything. And it's just adding to their already proven record of negligently weak enforcement of anti-corruption laws. There's just many cases in the past involving past prime ministers and government officials where they have clearly just rolled over and let people off for clear violations.
And this is the key point, and this is what people need to understand about organizations like yours and organizations like ours. We were called a crazy right-wing, YouTube channel by one of the CBC panelists last night, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Because, like you, we don't care what political alignment an official ties themselves to. If they break the law, or if they are perceived to have committed a crime, they need to be investigated, and if so, charged, and if so, found guilty, because there should not be a two-tier justice system in this country. And what bothered me even more about this panel on power and politics last night is two of the panelists, actually to your point of the Canadian political way, they said, well, I don't know why Pierre is even talking about this anymore, because Justin Trudeau isn't his opponent anymore. As if to imply it's only appropriate to want to prosecute a political opponent when they're a political opponent, when they retire or when they resign from public office. Now, even though they may have committed a crime, it's not okay to continue to pursue justice against them. And this is coming from people in the mainstream media that are saying this. And that just shocked me. You've spent a lot more time in this than I have. What do you say to that?
The news media is focused on news. And part of the techniques of anyone who wants to cover up a scandal is delay. Because then from many in the media's eyes, it becomes old news. There's always new news every day, and it's really difficult to raise it. We've had very little attention to this private prosecution application we filed last February from media who had covered the whole scandal before, and also when we released the 3,600 pages of documents, which no one had ever seen before. Very few in the media covered it, even though they had covered the scandal. And here was all sorts of new information about the scandal, and they didn't cover it. So that's kind of a systemic problem where the news media always focus on the new news. And so delay and denial and keeping things secret for a while, that works. to get most of the media to move on and say anyone who's raising it is raising old news and really shouldn't be focused on it anymore because there's new situations to focus on. And that's part of the Canadian way as well. Everyone knows that, and it's done over and over again. Delay, deny, keep things secret for a while, and then it won't be covered by the media much anymore. We handed it to them. We handed all the information, detailed summary, page by page, going through what had been disclosed in the RCP, highlighting the key things, the key unanswered questions, the key cover-up points, and almost no one covered it. APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, has done 2 pieces, did one yesterday. I've done a couple of talk radio. But I actually wrote today to a bunch of reporters who has written about Poilievre's comments and the RCMP commissioner's response. And they wrote articles that missed the 7 key facts that we've talked about today. And those are key facts to judging whether you agree with Poilievre's statement or not, because they're the 7 key facts that show that there was a cover-up. And they just omitted to those key facts. And I'm hoping they'll do follow-up articles that will set out the key facts, that the RCMP didn't interview everyone, that they never interviewed Trudeau, that they used an incorrect legal standard, that also the RCMP commissioner didn't even answer Pierre Poilievre's charge because his allegation was not that there was interference, but that there was a cover-up. And the RCMP commissioner has not answered that question. And hopefully what will happen now is, one, there should be a public inquiry into the RCMP's anti-corruption enforcement record because it's bad. And there are systemic reasons for it that we've talked about. 2, hopefully the Conservatives and other parties will soon, because they have a majority in Parliament, introduce a bill that would make the RCMP actually independent from the cabinet, with commissioner and deputy commissioners selected through merit-based independent processes as opposed to by the ruling party cabinet, and with fixed terms so that they can't be fired because they're not pleasing the cabinet. And those steps are needed, and hopefully we'll see those kind of steps very soon.
So let's turn to the effort of Democracy Watch to pursue the private prosecution. So where are we with that? And Canadians, you can find the link to the press release by Democracy Watch and their website on this in our description to read it in further detail. But Duff, where is Democracy Watch at with that? And are you hopeful that we may get a private prosecution?
Yes, so we filed it in February, and then we asked for an independent special prosecutor to be chosen through an independent process involving all provincial party leaders in Ontario, because this is under the Ontario law enforcement system. And we asked for that in March in a letter to the Ontario Attorney General. The Deputy Assistant Attorney General said no, that they were going to have this person, John Corelli, director of the Complex Prosecutions Bureau, review the evidence. We were going through motions of the court to have the initial hearing where we would present the evidence and a judge would decide whether a charge should be issued against Justin Trudeau and a prosecution commenced. And what John Corelli decided was to stop that from happening. He stayed the proceeding, is the technical term. And unfortunately, we can't challenge that in court. I mean, we could, but it's very clear from past court cases that the courts give wide discretion to prosecutors to proceed with a prosecution or not. That's the most you can do with a private prosecution. So we've gone back to the Attorney General and said, look, unfortunately, the Crown Counsel in Ontario used the same incorrect legal standard as the RCMP. So we can't prove criminal intent, meaning corrupt or deceitful, wrongful intent. That's not the standard for proving obstruction of justice. The standard is willful intent. Did you willfully do it? And so we're asking the Attorney General again, please do this process, have an independent person selected by all the party leaders in Ontario so everyone would view the person as independent and have them review it and make a decision. Don't accept this incorrect legal standard that your own Crown Counsel has used. We'll see whether that happens. Hopefully, if that doesn't happen at the federal level, the opposition parties could put forward a resolution in the House asking for an independent special prosecutor to be appointed to do a review of this situation and make a decision as to whether there should be a prosecution. Because using a correct legal standard and actually looking at the full evidence. And we'll continue pursuing both those avenues until we get a final answer. But unfortunately, we can't challenge it in court. Prosecutors have this broad discretion, and you can really only challenge a malicious prosecution in court where someone's prosecuted for the wrong reasons or bad reasons. You can't challenge a decision not to prosecute. That's where we're stuck. That's the most we can do as members of the public. And that's why long-term, the systemic change we need is like Quebec set up 15 years ago after it had a scandal like this. We need an independent police force that focuses on anti-corruption, could also focus at the federal level on anti-foreign interference, because that often involves politicians as well and government officials. And we need independent prosecutors that work with that police force who are not serving at the pleasure of the ruling party cabinet. And so we finally get effective, independent enforcement of anti-corruption rules in Canada. And every province needs the same, like Quebec set up. We need it at the federal level and in every jurisdiction across the country.
Now, you mentioned that there was 3,600 pages that you got access to, and when that was distributed out to the mainstream media, almost nobody covered it, which means almost no Canadians know what was in that 3,600 pages. What would you say is probably the most surprising or shocking revelation of that 3,600 pages that you found?
We've talked about it. The biggest one is that they started out, and there's a document that says we have to prove that Justin Trudeau willfully, with intent, tried to stop this prosecution. And then there's another document halfway down through the chronology of the investigation, which the investigation went on for about a year and a half. Again, another surprising thing is they only talked to 4 of the 15 people involved in the situation. But as you go down through the chronology, then there's this other document that says the standard we have to prove is that there was criminal intent, wrongful, corrupt intent in what Trudeau did. And that switch to the incorrect legal standard was the kicker. And it's after they've gathered a bunch of evidence showing that Trudeau the evidence does show that Trudeau willfully with intent obstructed justice. And then they suddenly switch and say, oh no, but that's not the standard. We have to show that he corruptly did it. And that's the incorrect legal standard. And once that decision was made, it was done because they had no evidence that Trudeau corruptly did it. Because of course he claimed he did it to protect jobs in Quebec. And that's not a corrupt intent. It's just a clear intent. So that was really the most surprising thing, is to see them actually switch standards in the middle of an investigation and then use that incorrect standard as the basis for letting the Prime Minister off.
Well, we will do what we can to increase the visibility on this and to make Canadians aware of this. For those watching, on behalf of Democracy Watch, let me just say, Canadians, we need your help. We need your help, because the only way things like this will move forward is via public pressure. And what does that mean? That means calling your MP, calling your MPP if you live in Ontario, because this is where this private prosecution would have to take place, because it has to take place in the jurisdiction of where the offense actually occurred, which is in Ontario. So contact your MP, contact your MPP, even if you're in a different riding in a different province, write one of the MPs in Ontario to ask for their support to push for a private prosecution, because we need public interest on this in order to move it forward. When there is no public interest, this is where, Duff, I think you're right. The Canadian way it takes over, where they hope this will go underground. They hope people stop paying attention, and then they can just move on. But if people keep paying attention and they keep putting pressure on, we have a chance to actually get some justice here. Do you agree?
Yes, and was a reason I was happy to see Pierre Poilievre mention this in your interview with him, and then the fact that someone posted that clip and it went viral on social media. caused the mainstream media to finally cover this situation again. We've been trying since February to get someone to cover this. And now it's back in the news, and everyone's being reminded about just how much of a smelly mess and cover up the RCMP's actions amount to. And so hopefully, as I said, though, we'll get further action from the opposition parties. They can do a lot more to put every MP in Parliament on the hot seat to decide, are you going to vote in favor of resolutions that will move to have independent, effective law enforcement? Or are you going to deny this and essentially extend the ongoing cover-up that started with the Trudeau government refusing to give the RCMP internal cabinet documents that were key evidence, and continued with the RCMP's negligently weak and incomplete investigation that was delayed and tried to be buried for a few years, and unfortunately has resulted in a decision by Ontario Crown Council to use the same incorrect legal standard and to stop a private prosecution instead of allowing us to go before a judge to see whether we could convince a judge that enough evidence was there. These things shouldn't be stopped. These decisions shouldn't be made behind closed doors. This should have all been heard in court, and it still could be if the opposition parties at the Ontario level and federal level keep pushing to ensure that we have an independent, fair, and effective resolution to this, both of these scandals.